Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. I had a really awesome guest on today. She's an experienced designer with a background in both physical and digital design. She has a passion to create products and tools that make our lives easier through technology, but with the simplicity and ease of the analog world. And she's obsessed with the Internet of Things, tangible interactions, and the death of two-dimensional screens, and will never give up her paper to-do lists and bound books. Please join me in welcoming Lauren von Dehsen. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Thomas.
My pleasure. Are you ready for 20 questions?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
So today I am a product design and UX design manager and leader at SoFi FinTech. I think of my job very much from the management side, but I got into it as someone that wanted to build and create things. And I've taken a very twisting path from my education and through a number of different jobs. I think of my work across all different software and digital interfaces and products, including, as you mentioned, physical products that are powered by software. And some days I'm doing more or less of that. Like today at SoFi, it's a much more traditional apps and desktop type work, but with each job comes different challenges.
Great. And I'll just give a shout out to one of the episodes that's maybe related to this with Dan Segal. Dan and I worked at Lenovo together, and he went on to ascend into kind of design leadership positions, maybe similar to what we're going to be talking about today. So number two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
I don't know if it's knowledge as much as the way I approach problem solving and how I think. I found that as a designer, I tend to be very far on the analytical side, trying to kind of balance logic and reasoning with creativity. And I find that both of those, for me, support each other very directly. But when I'm working through particularly software and how much is kind of based on what's possible and what can we make and where are our limitations, I tend to find myself thinking very kind of robotic, like following a path of thought until it leads me to a dead end, and then kind of backing up and trying a different path, almost if you could visualize like a maze, and just being very, very strict with myself in that way to really understand what some of our engineering partners are up against and how a problem might be solved. And that's not without creativity and thinking big and giving the space to try a lot of different things, but that kind of balance of open organic thought and very structured thought has been something that's been consistent for me throughout my career.
Awesome. Okay, number three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
I think I got here and took on these types of roles because I was interested in problem solving at the root of the way I think and what had always drawn me through my education. But I like the idea of never really solving the same problem twice, and the newness of putting my brain against something I haven't thought about before. And what I find with design and UX is that the skills are very much the same from problem to problem, but you can apply it to such a wide range of things. And so that variety has been something that's been very satisfying for me.
I love that. Okay, number four, some people struggle with, but the question is, what does your future look like?
I'm not really sure. I hope it looks like more challenging and innovative endeavors. I hope it looks like things that result, projects and challenges that result in putting a fingerprint on how we live and how we continue to improve our world for ourselves. I also hope that those things are beautiful and well crafted and bring a smile and delight to the people that are using them, that they're better than whatever they were there to replace. But I don't know what that looks like. And I think part of the excitement is to kind of figure it out as time goes on and as new opportunities present themselves.
Great. Okay, number 5 we say is unique to this podcast, and the question is about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
I could take this a number of different ways, but the one that hits me first, you may all hear from my accent. I am definitely an East Coaster. I grew up in New York State, not that far outside of New York City. And I moved out to San Francisco about 9 years ago. And I think that one of the things that has been pronounced for me is how the cultural norms and the culture that you're immersed in has an effect on the way we work, the way we operate, what's accepted in teams and in office environments. And so as a manager, I actually stepped into formal kind of in-house people management, flavor of management, pretty much at the time that I moved out to San Francisco. And so I can be a very direct and blunt person. And sometimes, especially when I was younger, it could be very off-putting to other people. And once you step into management, you really have to think about how you're communicating and how you're coming off to the team. And so seeing more of a West Coast approach that's a little bit less of that directness was really interesting and a challenge for me, and still is a challenge for me on certain days. But now getting to work with a group that's across the US in a lot of different locations, that actual kind of varied flavor of how people work, how people talk, how people exchange ideas has been really helpful, because you get a little bit of everything. And I think there's almost like an equalizing effect to that, where more flavors become palatable. So I really think about, I guess, the teamwork aspect and how place affects the cultural norms of that team and how the team works together.
That's great. I didn't know you're here on the West Coast. Glad to bring the lens of the podcast onto the West Coast. So number 6, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
I think one thing I'd remind myself at that stage is to absorb as much as possible and to work through a lens of curiosity. There's so many people that I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from, and they all bring different skills to the table. And so as you know, I hope that I was able to do that in actuality, but I think if I could go back to the start and give myself some advice, would almost be to be even more conscious of that, and to go into each project, each scenario, each company with that as a top of mind endeavor. Because I think as designers and as creative practitioners, there's only so much you're going to learn from a book or from school. There's so much more you're going to learn from being in the work and side by side with others of varying experiences who are sharing ideas, sharing skills they've learned, sharing different ways of thinking. And so much of the education really comes in that form.
Awesome. 7, what's a day in your life like?
Well, being in the corporate world, my day is meeting heavy. I get up on the early side. I don't know if that's, I'm not exactly sure if that's a West Coast thing that I've taken on, or if that's something that's come with management. Looking at others and their tendency to get up early, I think maybe it also is tied to a pattern found in leadership. But I get into the office, I try to get in before my first meetings, which could be as early as 7:30 or 8 in the morning. And I start basically talking a lot. I sometimes joke that, the primary way that I do my job is by talking to people and sharing ideas and working through things verbally, or giving feedback and reacting to things that the team is putting forward. On a best day, I'm working a lot with designers and trying to be in some of the problem spaces with them and giving perspective on the company's strategy, and how their work might fit in or help strengthen where we're headed. I think realistically, there's a lot of other things going on to help unblock and to help allow them to keep doing the work. And so my average day is spent a lot with cross-functional stakeholders and other leaders to make sure that the teams have what they need and as much clarity as we can provide them to keep getting the work done.
Great. Okay. Number 8, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
I try to absorb information as much as possible. I'm envious of a lot of friends and peers that seem to do that through heavy doses of reading and absorbing at times a book or more a week. I haven't quite gotten there. I've always been a slow reader, and so that format sometimes is tough for me. I have gotten very heavy into listening to podcasts, particularly during the pandemic. I really wasn't a podcast listener before that, but I've found a lot of the topics I'm interested in the tech world, in the creative world, and then just other aspects of life. There's so much good content out there. But I definitely also absorb through watching. So video format, YouTube, looking things up that I'm trying to dig into. But I think at times it can all be overwhelming. So kind of being paced in some way and not feeling like you have to learn everything all at once has also been helpful in terms of keeping on it and feeling sufficient in this area.
Nice. Okay. What tools do you use? Are you both, well, it sounds like you're both digital and analog.
Yeah, I've been known to carry around random pieces of paper, post-it notes, ripped pieces of paper, all with things jotted down on it. I think it's just faster. I go in between taking notes on my computer versus in paper, and I always end up, when push comes to shove, I always end up back on paper. I'm a list person. I like to cross things off the list, and I like to use lists to kind of constantly reprioritize what I think I need to be focused on and get done. As a team, we're based in Figma, which is an awesome tool and has really transformed, I think, how UX designers work. As compared to when I started out, we were making wireframes in InDesign, and I had 100-page books of specifications that was not at all scalable or efficient. But yeah, a lot of my day is looking at my calendar, using Zoom, Slacking other people, and I always love a great spreadsheet. I actually think that's a very underrated tool in the design world when you're dealing with content and states of things and just trying to get organized.
Great. And at this point, I'll give a shout out to our new guests, our new audience members who might not know that we also have a More Than Audio podcast, Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, a More Than Audio podcast. Recently had a Ukrainian guest on, Alex Sumina, who talked a lot about Figma. So if you like that conversation, definitely jump in there. So the next question is, how do you deal with work-life balance?
I am not a fan of this particular term, although I understand the intent, and the intent is a good one. I think of work-life balance as a goal to make to get a goal to get to the point where I'm able to do everything I want to do for work and everything I want to do in my life in parallel. And that ebbs and flows. I'm not even sure if I'm explaining my thought as clearly as I'd like to, but that balance ebbs and flows. There are times where there's a lot going on in my personal life, and I don't want to miss out on that, and I don't want to deprioritize it. And there are times where there's a lot going on at work that I see as valuable and important, and I'm responsible for on behalf of my team. And so finding a way for me to shift the balance and to accommodate over many, a longer period of time is important to me. But I think the term itself makes a lot of people believe it can be 50-50, or that it can be perfectly in balance each and every week. And I've never really found anyone that I think can achieve that. And I tend to feel that's almost setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves. And so I think about it more as not having to turn anything down that I care about, and being able to make those trade-offs, which is hard in and of itself.
Great, I like that one. So we're just past halfway. Number 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
I'm not really sure. I think of all of the points where I probably made a pretty significant decision that's led me down the path I've gone. And if I back up to some of those decision points, I could see having gone down a path where I would have taken on more of an engineering lens, whether that's software engineering or more of a physical-based engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, etc. But I have a hard time imagining that I wouldn't be somewhere in the world I am today. I just might be doing a different aspect or playing a different role in the team. But it's an interesting one. I think, who knows? There's probably decisions I made that I don't even realize I made that could have been other points that led me down a very different path.
Nice. Okay, number 12, what would you not like to do with your career?
Oh, wow. I would not like to get complacent. I think it's at a certain point, it's easy to kind of find a spot you're comfortable and stick with it. And for a lot of people, that might be the right call. And that might be the right call for a chapter based on what we were just talking about, making space for other things in your life that you want to do. For me, there's a desire to keep learning and keep challenging myself, and seeing a lot of different spaces, learning a lot of different things through my work and through the types of projects I take on. And so I think for me, I want to always kind of keep that hunger and passion for what I do. I think if I'm losing that, I'd be very unsettled.
We had John Maeda on the show, and he had a very similar answer. He said, whenever he gets comfortable, then he has to kind of immediately course correct and get into this kind of uncomfortable state. Okay, number 13, do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Not necessarily a favorite, but I think one that I often use, my team will often hear me say, is that, and this is likely a quote from someone else, I'm just not sure who, but the second that you start getting exhausted of repeating yourself is the first time others have heard you. I think that's particularly true when you're leading teams. You've been thinking about something and you feel like you've been saying it over and over again, but it takes a while before the message is out, and it takes a while before people can absorb that information and act on it. And so that sort of taking a deep breath and digging in and saying it again as if it's the first time is an important one to remember.
Great. And how about a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Maybe it's cliche, but anything that sort of says it can't be done or shuts down an idea prematurely, I think is challenging in the space that we work. There's a lot of reasons something might not be able to be done in a specific way, but if you can go back to the intent of what it is we're trying to achieve, there's likely another way we just haven't thought of yet, or the right people haven't come together on to make possible. And so that idea of I can't or no, or shutting something down too early, which I'm sure I'm sure I have done before myself. It's a pattern we all fall into. But keeping teams really seeing possibilities and thinking creatively about how do we do it is so important.
Nice. And if you had to choose one word to describe yourself, which word would you choose?
I think the one that I go back to a lot is tenacity. I actually never thought about myself that way until someone used that word in a letter of recommendation. And it stuck with me because I think what I'll find myself is I'll get discouraged or I'll be frustrated with how something's played out. And I try to go through that cycle quickly, reset, and then find another approach. And I've found that that's played out well, whether it's digging into a role and sticking with it and seeing a project and an experience through to the conclusion, or just being open to hitting a wall and finding another way through. It doesn't always work, and sometimes you can stick at something for too long when you need to actually call it quits. But I've found that aspect of my personality has been really helpful to what it is we do.
Great. And what keeps you up at night?
I think I'm often thinking about the team and what can be done to help them more, what can be done to unblock them more, what can be done to make more of their ideas come to life. That's a very all-encompassing aspect of what I do, and because those problems never stop, no matter how effective and how great the team is, you're always looking to help improve. I think there's a bigger conversation though going on that's on everybody's minds around where has technology helped us and where has technology maybe hindered us or had secondary effects that we didn't foresee. And so, that may not be in my day-to-day what keeps me up at night while I'm engrossed in my particular job and my particular reality, but I think it's something on a lot of our minds in the industry. And I definitely give a lot of credit to those that are spending a lot of their time, their primary focus on helping us figure out how to improve and how to move forward.
Great. And approaching the final stretch here, number 17, what's a dream you're chasing?
I don't know about this one. I think a dream that I'm chasing is it's for me, it's about being proud of the cumulative set of work I've had a hand in putting out in the world. And so it may not be so much a dream as much as an everyday thought process. And the dream aspect of it is to hope that I can look back on all the different things that I've touched over the course of my career and really feel proud about how those have played into the evolution of digital products and the evolution of how people leverage them every day.
Great. And 18, what inspires you?
I'm inspired a lot by things that I haven't seen before. And so obviously the last few years travel has been more challenging until recently. But I've always loved traveling to places I haven't been before, especially places that I don't have any particular notion of what they might be like. Places that are maybe a little less talked about, a little bit less known. You didn't hear about, you heard about the big cities when you're a kid in school, but maybe not the secondaries and smaller cities and towns throughout the world. And so getting an opportunity to go places where I don't have any preconceived notions and I don't know what I'm going to learn or see or take away from that place, I find that those experiences, I come back inspired and I come back almost mentally reset. It's like getting out of the monotony and the kind of constant of day to day and having a new thought and a new exposure is very inspiring to me as a designer.
Great. And advice, any advice you'd like to share?
My advice, I guess, is to keep pushing, especially when something is hard, especially when you're not really sure how you're going to do it, how you're going to get to a conclusion, how you're going to get through the project. Keep digging in and keep pushing, because I think those are the most valuable and rewarding situations. Particularly, you mentioned my hardware background. When you go through a hardware project, a lot of times it's at a minimum a year or 18 months for consumer electronics, let's say. And you have to kind of stick with the project and track your decisions and dig into all the twists and turns that you learn about before you ever get that gratification of the product hitting the shelves, or better yet, getting into people's hands. And, when we're working in software, you can get a lot more kind of quick feedback and cycles because you can put new things out constantly. I really think thinking through what we put out there and baking things a little bit longer and being more maybe strategic with what's experimented and what's really kind of baked and thoroughly worked through and before it's put in people's hands. I think that's really important. And I'm starting to see indications that, the idea of kind of break things quickly, that I think was such a guiding light in the tech industry for a while, I think it's starting to maybe go away or be reeled into where that makes sense to do, as opposed to doing that with everything. So it can be hard. It can be discouraging if, you have to kind of put so much time and energy in before something makes it out into the world, but it can also be very gratifying. And so for the designers, particularly the creatives out there, I think it's really important to try to get into that mindset and help us get more reliable and safe products and releases out into the world.
Great. And the one everyone loves, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What's our call to action? How do we follow you?
I'm most active in LinkedIn and Instagram, where my account is public for anyone that's interested. I have a presence on Twitter, or X as it's now called, but I definitely am not as active there. But I love to hear what's going on and happy to chat with anyone who's interested in reaching out.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like I've been following you for a while through your LinkedIn posts, but finally kind of being able to connect like this is super great. And also to have this kind of managerial kind of leadership portion of design on the show and to kind of expand that out, I think is really important and really rewarding for the guests that is for. So thank you so much for being on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.